weather on Tuesday. A fairly decent tornado threat, all things considered. Slightly later in the season, we typically see something like this organized, and there are some interesting ways in which this overall system is structured that kind of give me pause on it. But one of the things we often talk about in meteorology, especially when you're forecasting, certain weather events, is that it's about ingredients. It's about having them the right amount, and sometimes the overall pattern doesn't recognize exactly the same way you'd expect, but the ingredients are there. And that is the case with what we're looking at for Tuesday, where tornadoes and perhaps even an isolated strong tornado are possible. So we'll wait for some folks to get on here. Hi, Kimberly, and all the other folks that are kind of coming in. I'm going to go get my other mouse. I have to have the vertical mouse. Give me just a second. I realized I left it over at the weather cart and the chroma key. Okay. So with that in mind, let's kind of get started here. Hopefully you all are doing all right. Um, so first and foremost, well, maybe not first and foremost, but firstly, pretty warm out there. One of the factors we're watching is this front to the north. That won't as much be a factor as it's been the last couple days, but the system back out toward the plains will be as active and severe weather moves in starting tomorrow afternoon and evening. Now, that has produced, as you can see, a lot of severe weather back out for the plains. A lot of these purple boxes you see here are all flash flood warnings. So, showing the significant amount of moisture the system has, and also the training echoes where storms kind of follow the same path. I do not expect as much of that here for tomorrow once it moves into our area, but certainly, obviously, heavy rainfall and lightning always an issue with these. So that is the system there that is moving toward us. And so the severe weather risk for your Tuesday then kind of puts the bullseye, so to speak, sort of over top of us. It's a level 3 out of 5 risk. And while technically wind is a slightly greater likelihood here, as you can see a level 4 on our category there, we're not expecting as many of the super high end wind gusts. Most of these wind gusts are more in the neighborhood of 60 to maybe 65 or 70 miles per hour, but not a whole lot beyond that. Though some of our projections show a little bit more on the strong wind potential than they had previously. Bigger concern is actually the tornado threat. And the reason that's the case is because we're likely looking at isolated supercell thunderstorms, kind of a line of those, a broken line of those sort of storms, kind of move from west to east through the area. And it's not something we see that often. Well, it'll be May 20th. Typically, that'd be more, say, April 20th or April 10th or something like that. But just the way this pattern is lining up, that is what we are looking at for tomorrow, that potential. And that's why perhaps a strong tornado is possible out of this setup. So I want to make sure we're clear there. A couple isolated strong tornadoes are possible. It's a little out of character for this time of the year. One of the things that makes this kind of tricky, and I'm going to start with the nerd stuff here and then work my way back from that for a moment, is if I go to the jet stream here, which is a river of fast-moving air in the upper levels of the atmosphere, we have a pretty pronounced trough back to the west. Let me see if we can plop on contours on that there. We'll give that just a second here for this to populate in. There we go. And so you can see that pretty pronounced dip back there. We call that a negatively tilted trough. And it is pretty well positioned just right. But what's interesting, and I'm going to change this now to the next 24 hours on that. And I'm going to pop off the satellite picture for a moment. As that kind of ejects more toward us, you can see that for tomorrow, it continues to kind of lift northward, and we have our negatively tilted trough still, it kind of extends all the way there. But our flow aloft is kind of more, that's not the one I want. It's more from west to east. Give me a second to kind of pull up. Let's just do that. That'll work. You can see just all the dots. Like they're almost, we would call that westerly. And so that's not something necessarily we have. We're a little more southwesterly here, but it's coming in kind of a really sharp westerly angle. That's not typical for us when we start talking about it. But again, this is where the ingredients come in, because that then can help to contribute with that exact angle to some of the shear that will help potentially keep some of those storms a little more discrete, individual by themselves, as opposed to just a full-on squall line. So I wanted to start with that nerd in there to say that that's one of the things that is a little bit off from our typical setup, but is still substantial enough. Let's look at kind of some of the projections. And again, we're waiting for the latest data still to come in, as we often are this time of night. But one projection that is in at this moment that we trust and we utilize often is what we call the HRRR. It's a high resolution projection. What you'll note is it does keep most activity up to the north of us initially, but the evening version of this, and this is different from what we had earlier, even at 5 and 6 o'clock, does have a few of those showers and thunderstorms into our area in the morning. These would most likely be non-severe, but it's interesting to see how that could play a factor in how things evolve later on in the day. One thing that you can clearly see is that we do get these individual thunderstorms coming in later in the afternoon and the early evening, and there's potential that some of those could be strong to severe. There's still, that looks a little bit more like a line there from north of Oxford back to north of Greenville versus what it was a little earlier today. So frankly, that makes me feel better about it because let me show you this. And this is about as aggressive as we can go. I'm going to go back one model run. This would be midday today. And I'm going to change this instead of base reflectivity to composite. Okay. So you see how you have, best way to do this, come back up to, here we go. I can just start circling individual potential tornado producing thunderstorms, right? Anytime you have this discrete storms by themselves, we get pretty worried that they could, track and produce tornadoes for an extended period of time. And that was the way in which this was projected earlier today. So at least one or two of those, that'd be really interesting. The interesting part about that, though, is that looking at the latest run here, see if we can get it over here to 0Z today. We still have some of those areas, but you'll notice how, I'll get the circle in here for a second. You'll also notice how there's some, there's less gaps in between these, right? I mean, there's a solid gap. This up one there is still definitely a gap. But in the middle, not as much. So, and models go back and forth like this, but that's an encouraging sign that perhaps maybe they're not quite as discrete as what was a very ugly and somewhat alarming projection that it had earlier today. So all that to say that is an improvement from earlier today. That's still likely severe. That's still likely some isolated tornado potential. And certainly where you kind of see some of those spots there, like that one that moves from Aberdeen there and Winfield, started in Tupelo and kind of worked southeast. That would be a wind enhancement as well in that. A strong wind enhancement, maybe 60 to 70 mile per hour winds. So there are encouraging signs there, and there are discouraging signs at the same time. Looking at, this should be the latest on this as well. Give me a moment to get this over here. You can see the morning stuff when we look at storm rotation, all kind of north of us, right? It's these afternoon storms where you have some of these streaks that show up and kind of, extend hour to hour there. Anytime these connect, we get more concerned. The good news, hold on, to change that time, that needs to go beyond 7 p.m., it needs to go to 11 p.m. Okay, let's try that. So the good news is that the ones that connect, this big blob you see there, that's shear, that's rotation, that's helicity. But it's, when you get big blobs like that, typically it's with, you're getting shear because of, all the strong winds, and a bow echo will sometimes, one of the big wind producers will sometimes kick out a big blob there. I don't get as concerned about those producing tornadoes. It's these individual ones that I get a lot more concerned with. The individual ones are not quite as individual or potent. That one back toward Memphis is. Um, and again, positioning is something that will be adjusted. I mean, next model run comes out, it'll be 2 counties south or 2 counties north. That always changes. So don't get back to that stuff. We're looking at the trend. And the trend is more hopeful that this isn't big bad tornadoes, but still enough there to say it still seems reasonable, in particular in the time frame here, from around 5 until 9 to 10 p.m., that maybe one of these is in just the right spot to produce tornadoes. And if you can get one of these to produce a tornado, and it's still by itself, it's not unreasonable that you get a strong tornado. That would be EF4 or greater. No, geez, someone said level 4. Ignore what I just said. I read the 4 off there. EF2 or greater. My brain started thinking what Kaylin was asking, which was if we were going to get upgraded to a level 4 risk. So let me clarify here for a second. I think there's a potential maybe get a strong tornado, which would be EF2 or greater. I don't know that we're talking high-end tornado. So let's be clear about that. Not based on this projection. This projection looks a little more friendly than what we had before. The question, though, was, do we think right now as we sit at a level 3 out of 4 risk, do we think we see an upgrade to level 4? First off, I don't think it matters. Here's why it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because this is math. And the math on this says that, with the greater number here, the greater number of reports, not necessarily stronger reports, right? This is just the overall number of reports. So you would expect in a level 5 risk just to have tons and tons of reports. In a level 3 risk to still have quite a few. In level 1, sporadic reports. But a level 1 can still support a tornado. If it hits you, that's not good. A level 3 can still support strong tornadoes. And if that hits you, it could be a major day for you. But that might be the only tornado we have in the region, hence the lower number, right? So you could still have a strong tornado in this setup as opposed to necessarily it being higher number. That's the only time you get the strong tornadoes. This is about the number of reports. So I don't know that based on what I'm looking at, with largely what's a one and done scenario, and that's what this is. It's kind of one and done. I don't know for sure that we would see an upgrade to a higher risk level. Not impossible, but it's when you see kind of multiple chances in the same spot that the math goes up. Okay? So looking at the tornado risk, pretty much everywhere in that same orange we're looking at there is where we have that potential for strong tornadoes. And that's what this white area represents here. The possibility where we could see a strong tornado. That's that EF2 and greater. So I would say most locations have that threat tomorrow because of the isolated nature of those storms. Now, we're not going to be able to nail down right now an exact location on those. Here's why. Because we look for run-to-run consistency, the model doing the same thing over and over again. Well, I don't have great consistency on an exact spot yet. That's something they'll probably start to show, sometimes shows up at this time frame, but more likely to show up as we look into tomorrow to see where it's really kind of nailing that down. But I would say the model trend is slightly more encouraging than it was earlier today. And we weren't necessarily really banging the drum super hard at 5 and 6 o'clock, partially just because of the time of year and the overall pattern is a little bit off from what we typically see. This is one that if we need to really bang the drum hard, we'll ratchet up kind of toward the last second, toward tomorrow. You'll know based on the tone of voice in the morning how I'm feeling on that. So this is an encouraging sign. And considering the other mitigating factors, the odd angle in the trough, it's not odd, but it's just a little bit different. Time of year, it's a little hotter. I mean, we're going to be close to 90 tomorrow. We don't very often have tornadoes when we're in the upper 80s for highs. It can happen because it's about ingredients in the right proportions. But there's just a couple things that are just a little bit off of what we typically see in this scenario for what our typical tornado scenario is. And that's the reason I'm playing it, not cautious, but conservative, I guess would be the right word on playing this up at this point. But there's plenty of evidence there that we'll have tornado watches probably as early as 4 o'clock, maybe 3 o'clock in some spots, if they start with the watches west and don't include the whole area at once. So we'll have tornado watches. And a watch means that the ingredients are in place that could lead to development of something. So when we're talking about tornado watches, that means that, it's possible that something could develop. And so those ingredients are there. I'm trying to think. Feel like I have that graphic someplace, and that has gotten deleted or moved. Give me just a second here. I think the do I have it built into this one? Let me double check here. See if I have it built into this. I do not. That's unfortunate. As you can see, there are tornado watches back to the north and west with this. Nope, I don't have it built in. I don't know where that went. Oh well. So, big headlines. At 10 o'clock, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to keep looking and digging in on the run-to-run consistency. Just looking closer, can we find one of those tracks that's a little bit more likely? If it's doing models doing the same thing over and over again, we can trust it, right? It's the idea that if I say I'm going to do something and I do it, you believe me, right? And so if the model says it and says it and says it and says it, the odds of it doing it are usually better. So that's what we're going to look at, kind of that run-to-run consistency on the models at 10 o'clock. And really kind of flesh out. There's another projection that we look at here, our in-house storm tracker model called the graph. And we'll see whether or not that has gone a little bit more supercellular as opposed to a line. And those two things will be the big thing, give us kind of an idea of exactly how we want to approach this going forward. So what do you need to know? Number one, tomorrow afternoon, evening, starting as early as maybe 4 to 5 o'clock in the western part, far western fringe of the area, and then kind of reaching its peak from Ripley to Eupora to Kosciuszko, close to say 6 o'clock, somewhere in that neighborhood, maybe 7, 5 to 7, we'll say. Tupelo, Aberdeen, Starkville, somewhere in that 6 to 8 p.m. time frame. There'll be a few thunderstorms running ahead of this, but this is the main batch. And then exiting our Alabama counties, what you see, Pickens, Lamar, Franklin, and Marion counties, exiting those by, say, 9 to 10 o'clock. Someone was asking if Tupelo or different locations are in the path of this. Everybody's in the path of a chance. It is tomorrow night, well, tomorrow afternoon and evening in particular, and all this should be out of here prior to midnight. Strong tornado is a possibility. It's not the highest confidence scenario we can have, but the ingredients say that it's possible, and the ingredients are ingredients. And you can make, I always say this to the kids when I do school visits, you can make one brownie. It's probably harder than making a whole pan of brownies, but you can make one brownie, and it can be one really good brownie. And so while we might not make a ton of tornado-producing thunderstorms or tornado-warned thunderstorms tomorrow, because the ingredients are there in enough quantity, we might make one that's strong, even if we don't make a lot of them, if that makes sense. So 5 to 10 p.m. is our peak time frame tomorrow, maybe a little earlier west, maybe a bit later east, and a couple strong tornadoes, not impossible, large hail, damaging winds. And this transitions more into a damaging wind threat as it works its way into Alabama and locations to the east. I see Mary there talking about weather call, Lindsay talking about weather call there. Let me go ahead and click that, and nope, it won't let me pin it. Not gonna let me pin it. Oh well. The reason why we talk about weather call is because it's kind of your personalized tornado warning, lets you know when to go. I have them from my family. I usually let you hear it on the air. It really is a peace of mind thing, and lets you know, okay, this one I actually have to pay attention to because it really is coming for me. So it lets you know that. Saw someone asking about the SEC tournament. I was talking to our sports director, Jason, about that just a little bit ago. And the Mississippi State game could go late enough that there could be issues from this once it makes its way into Alabama. The odds are that it should be weakening a little bit by the time it gets to Birmingham there and Hoover. But there could still be some issues from it there. So, and I appreciate Katrina mentioning that best $12 she's ever spent on weather call. Trust me, it's for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. You don't have to be anxious and worry about this because you've taken care of half the equation. The first half of the equation is knowing you need to shelter. Actually, maybe the first half is knowing where to shelter. But those are the two things. You know where to shelter. You know that you need to shelter. You're done. I mean, what we do is important, don't get me wrong, but those are the two things you really have to do. So, So anyway, and then beyond tomorrow, we should finally be done for a few days and dry out for a few days. So can't wait for that. I know some of you are probably in the exact same boat. All right. Um, let's go ahead and pray and we'll move on with this. Um, God, just protect us, help us to make wise choices tomorrow. Uh, and I just thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to these people about what's going on. Help them keep them safe and help us get through this. God, help there to be something again obvious that is wrong with this setup to keep us safe. Be with those that have lost property, had damage recently. There have been a lot of folks that have had that from wind, just the wind damage. God, just be with them and help them in their cleanup efforts and engage your hands and feet to help them. And God, be with those that have bad weather tonight and keep them safe as well outside of here. Thank you for blessing me and my family in this way and the team that we have. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. Um, we will see you at 10 o'clock, hopefully with something that makes sense. All right. We'll see y'all soon.